Take one.
Charlie, Papavizas, Winston, and Strawn, Washington, D.C.
Charlie, you gave us a fascinating presentation earlier today about the Jones Act and offshore wind. But just how much is the Jones Act actually a barrier to foreign operators doing business in the US?
Well, it is a barrier to some degree because many activities that an offshore person might want to do in the United States and U.S. waters must be done by a qualified vessel, meaning a vessel built in the United States and owned and operated by U.S. citizens. And the main barrier in those qualifications is built in the United States.
Okay, and you focused about the Jones Act and its impact on the offshore wind sector. But I'd like to start by going to something a bit more basic. And how important is offshore wind to a country with so much oil?
Well, it's been a long time coming in the sense that there's been planning for offshore wind in the United States for probably decades, and definitely the presence, maybe more so, of natural gas than oil in the United States probably tends to retard the progress of offshore wind. But at the same time, the idea of global warming is strongly held in a large part of the United States, especially in the northeast of the United States. And as a result of recent governor elections and other factors, states like Massachusetts, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia are very active in trying to pursue offshore wind farms. So although the idea may seem contradictory, that the oil and gas may impede or contradict, the United States is very much leaning towards offshore wind. And then the last point on that is people forget that onshore, the United States is a leader in wind technology and other factors, and it's just the extension to offshore that is new.
Okay, a lot of people wouldn't realise that. You said during the discussion to your paper that the Jones Act adds to costs, and there's no great surprise there. But you also said that it's not stopped investment in the US offshore wind sector. How are operators squaring that circle?
Well, I think the analogy is to the oil and gas community, which there has been oil and gas development, exploration, and production, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, for decades. And yet the Jones Act has been around during that entire time. And the industry has accommodated itself to those factors and has worked very well. It may have added some to the cost, but at the same time, the oil and gas is closer to the United States. And I would say that similar factors may be at work with offshore wind energy, which is, although it may add some to the cost, the offshore wind is close to very valuable markets, and those markets may be willing to pay a slight premium.
So it's worth making those investments despite the hindrances.
Yes, well, and also the hindrances are sometimes misunderstood. They're not necessarily as debilitating as might be the case. For example, we know that a vessel that is stationary and is in the act of mere installation or construction doesn't need to be a U.S. Jones Act qualified vessel.
Well, that's a very interesting point. And you suggested also there are some uncertainties about whether the Jones Act applies to offshore wind projects, and I guess that's an example that you've got in mind. But you also said that the offshore wind community assumes that it does apply. Why would they do that?
Well, the way the Jones Act extends offshore is via another law, the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, or OXLA. And OXLA was written during the oil and gas activities in the United States. It started in 1953 and was amended subsequently in 1978. And in that law, it was oriented towards the production of oil and gas resources, natural resources. And just for a technical reason, arguably it does not extend the Jones Act ashore for renewable energy, just because renewable energy does not fall within the definition. Everyone has assumed that it applies anyway, despite this technical interpretation, because I think the thinking is, especially with very long-term projects like offshore wind, 5, 10, 15, 20-year projects, that if someone proceeds as if it doesn't apply, the Jones Act community will press Congress very hard to change this, change the loophole, close the loophole, and make the technical interpretation such that the Jones Act applies. And no one is willing to take the chance. And so everyone proceeds as if the loophole doesn't exist.
Which makes one of the other points you said during your presentation, that the Jones Act community is much more organised than the rest of the community, and I suppose that's exactly what happens when the sector realizes that.
Yes, well, this rule may apply in every country, but in the United States it definitely applies, which is that a small determined minority usually beats a large disinterested majority every day of the week. So that's anytime you have a small organized group, and not so small actually, but you have an organized group such as the Jones Act community, and they are very determined on a single issue, they're a formidable force.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much indeed for that analysis. Has it been a useful day for you today?
Very useful. I find this conference very interesting and informative, and lots of variety in presentations and speakers and attendees, and it's really excellent.